Comité parlementaire britannique pour la liberté en Iran, des protestations étendues contre le régime en Iran démontrent le soutien croissant à un changement démocratique, a déclaré Mme Maryam Radjavi, présidente de la République élue de la résistance iranienne, à une délégation britannique de parlementaires et de juristes. Mme Radjavi a affirmé « La résistance iranienne peut apporter un changement démocratique en Iran. Nous proposons un gouvernement laïque basé sur des principes démocratiques avec le respect des droits humains. » Elle a ajouté « La politique de complaisance adoptée ces 2 dernières décennies vis-à-vis du régime iranien a encouragé les mollahs dans leur répression violente de la population iranienne et a agi comme le plus grand obstacle au changement démocratique. »
Let me say it again, that we are asking no foreign government for money or arms. The Iranian resistance has the potentials to bring about democratic change in Iran. But for years, much of its energy, time, and resources have been spent on battling the consequences on the policy of appeasement by the West. The Iranian resistance has what it takes to bring about change in Iran. First, it has a vast network inside Iran, despite the brutal suppression and an extensive disinformation campaign to undermine the democratic opposition. The mullahs have failed to contain the resistance. Second, it represents a political alternative in the form of the National Council of Resistance of Iran. Different sectors of Iranian society, different political views, and ethnic and religious minorities and represented in the council. It's fully committed to the result of free and fair elections as the only source of political legitimacy. Separation of mosque and state, gender equality, and a commitment to all international conventions. It's also committed to holding free elections within 6 months after the overthrow of the mullahs regime. It has also called for a referendum for regime change under the supervision of the United Nations. Third, it has assembled a well-organized and highly trained force along the frontiers of Iran. This gives it the ability to play a key role in breaking the regime's grip and organizing the Iranian people's uprising to bring about change. Finally, the PMI is at the core of this resistance. With a 40-year history of struggle for freedom, the PMI advocates a tolerant and democratic Islam. The mullahs are on the verge of obtaining nuclear weapons. The world community does not have much time and must act quickly. We say no to appeasement and no to war. There is a third option, change by the Iranian people and their organized resistance movement. The UN Security Council should impose diplomatic, military, and oil sanctions against the mullahs regime. The time has come for the UK government to listen to the voice of parliaments and we proscribe the PMOI.
La délégation conduite par Lord Corbett of Castlewall, qui préside le comité parlementaire britannique pour la liberté en Iran, comprenait des avocats et des membres des deux chambres du Parlement britannique. Elle s'est réjouie du transfert du dossier nucléaire de l'Iran au Conseil de sécurité de l'ONU et a estimé que des sanctions globales devraient être adoptées pour empêcher le régime de développer des armes nucléaires. Lord Corbett a dit « Les tentatives de complaisance avec les mollahs n'ont pas marché. Elles les ont simplement aidés à maintenir un régime répressif et violent au pouvoir. » Nous soutenons le point de vue de Madame Radjavi, comme quoi ni la complaisance ni la force militaire n'apportent de réponse à la menace posée par le régime iranien. À la place, un changement démocratique doit se faire à travers le peuple iranien et sa résistance.
I'm happy to say that the majority of backbench members of all parties in Parliament and about 155 members of the House of Lords, it's about 450 of us in all, support the growing demand for the lifting of the terrorist prescription on the PMOI. It was never justified in the first place. It is even less justified now in the light of what we now know about what is really going on in Iran. And it is our view that the Iranian resistance are allies in the struggle to offer democracy, human rights and freedom to the people of Iran. The real terrorists are those who act as terrorism's central bankers seated in Tehran, those who use terror at home and sponsor it abroad. And it is one of the ironies of this whole position that it is the victims of terror.
La délégation a reconnu le rôle joué par l'OMPI pour faire progresser le processus démocratique en Irak et dévoiler l'ingérence terroriste et intégriste du régime iranien dans ce pays.
The solution is to support the third option, which has been preferred by Madam Rajavi. And her solution, of course, is the bringing about of democratic change in Iran through the Iranian people and their resistance.
When you consider the nature of the regime, a brutal theocratic dictatorship responsible for appalling abuses of human rights, as who said it, I think it was you, Robin, that it was the central bank of terrorism, a very, very shrewd comparison, but also very active as well as financing in actually committing acts of terror. When one considers that and contrasts it with the fact that the NCRI has long been committed to democracy, to human rights, notably equal rights between men and women, how the democracies of Europe can fail to support the NCRI really beggars belief. One cannot understand it. The contrast is so enormous. I think, for example, it is particularly incredible.
Elle a aussi insisté sur le droit à l'asile politique du personnel de l'OMPI à la cité d'Ashraf. Lord Corbett a ajouté « Il est temps que notre gouvernement et d'autres au sein de l'Union européenne reconnaissent la réalité et accueillent la résistance iranienne comme une amie dans un effort commun pour restaurer la démocratie et les droits de l'homme, que les mollahs ont dérobés au peuple iranien. »
So the West and the international community should now recognize that the best chance to build a free and democratic and secular Iran based on equality for all is the PMOI, and that this process needs to be started by removing the PMOI from the terror list in the United Kingdom, in the EU, in the United States. For as long as the PMOI is on that list, it offers the mullahs a perfect excuse to brand the organization, and to deny the Iranian people their right to an effective opposition. As we've heard, the Foreign Secretary has admitted that the PMOI is on the list for one reason and one reason only, not because of anything which it has done in the United Kingdom or in the West, but solely because the mullahs asked the United Kingdom to put the PMOI on the list. And as Lord Russell Johnson has said, the PMOI should not be used, and the terror tag, with all that that entails, should not be used as a bargaining chip in the appeasement process. Asked only last month why the PMOI is still on the list, spokesmen of our government had no answer to give at all.
We have concerns about the political manipulation of terror lists as a tool of foreign policy. We know in relation to Iran that the PMOI was offered up on the plate of constructive engagement, and it's clear now that that policy is in tatters. My own personal view is, as Stephen Gross has eloquently set out, is that there is no legal justification for prescription. There never was, and there certainly isn't, given all the declarations that the PMOI have made in the last 4 or 5 years. I want to echo what everyone has said around this table, and that is, if one wants to promote human rights and a return to the rule of law in Iran, and if one wants to promote democratic change, then the only conceivable basis for doing so in the long term is to allow all the democratic forces, both within Iran and outside of Iran, within civil society, to be able to freely organise and put forward the case for democratic reform. And that can only really truly begin if we get rid of this monstrous prescription regime that is so subject to the vagaries of political judgment. It's time that the West, I think, took a stand on principle, and that stand should begin within the High Court of Justice in Britain. Thank you.
But I do think that it's now time that the West, and particularly the United Kingdom government, should both acknowledge that and reward it. And the way they can acknowledge it is, in my view, to lift the terror tag against the PMOI, which, as Lord Corbett has already indicated, we think was never justified in the first place, but should be lifted now for 2 important reasons. One is simply out of justice, and secondly, because it would be good politics to lift it. Lifting it would send a quite definite signal to the regime in Tehran that there's a sea change of attitudes in the United Kingdom and the European Union. Unfortunately and foolishly, in our view, the signals have been in the reverse. There has been this constant appeasement, which we know to our costs in Europe, you pay a heavy price for in the longer term. And in my view, we could begin the reverse of that trend if we were to do justice to the PMOI.